They said madness had taken me, that no sane boy could spend hours speaking to trees and hearing them whisper back. But the truth is, the forest didn't drive me mad. It saved me from a world that had already forgotten how to listen. I grew up in a forgotten corner of the world, in a village so small it never had a name on any map. The people there were born into dust, lived in hunger, and died with their stories buried beneath unmarked soil. Our huts were woven from reed and sorrow, our fields cracked beneath the sun, and our prayers rose each morning like smoke that never found a god. Beyond the last hut stood the forest, ancient, untamed, and alive in ways few dared to imagine. The elders called it Ewu Ajoji, the forest of strangers, a place where the spirits of the old world still breathed through bark and root. They warned us never to wander too deep, because those who listened to the forest too closely often returned with silence in their eyes. But I was never afraid of silence. I was born inside it. My father had died before my first memory, and my mother, a quiet woman who spoke more to the sky than to men, carried grief like a second shadow. I learned early that pain speaks its own language, one that only nature answers without judgment. I spent my days alone at the forest's edge, tracing patterns in the dirt, listening to the wind move through the leaves, the sound of it soft, rhythmic, almost human. At first I thought it was only my imagination, a lonely child pretending that the world noticed him. But one afternoon, when I wept by the roots of an old baobab after being beaten by older boys, I heard it. A whisper low and warm as breath against my ear. "Do not cry, child. The roots remember pain, too." I froze. The voice had not come from any direction. It had come from everywhere. From the rustle of leaves, the murmur of grass, the pulse beneath my hand, pressed to the earth. And though I was trembling, a strange calm spread through me. I whispered back, "Who are you?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was listening. From that day forward, I understood what the rest of the village never could. The forest was alive, and it carried stories older than men, older than kings, older than sin itself. But wonder is a dangerous thing when wrapped in poverty. When word spread that I spoke to trees, the laughter came first, then the fear. The elders began to whisper that I was Ogbanje, a spirit child, cursed by the ancestors. They said my voice would call storms, my breath would poison harvests. Mothers pulled their children away when I passed, and even my mother began to pray harder, her eyes filled with both love and terror. "Promise me," she begged one night, "that you'll stop listening. The forest does not speak without reason." But I couldn't stop. The trees called to me as if they had been waiting centuries for someone to answer back. So, I listened. And the more I listened, the more I learned. I could feel the pain of trees when their branches were cut, the sorrow of soil when it was left barren, the faint tremor in the ground when rain forgot its way home. The forest became my family, patient, wise, eternal. Yet even I could sense that something had changed. The air grew restless. The birds stopped singing at dawn. The wind no longer carried laughter, only warning. It happened one night beneath a sky swollen with thunder. I had gone to the forest to escape the voices of the villagers who had called me cursed again after a child fell ill. Lightning flashed through the canopy, illuminating the trees like sleeping giants. I pressed my palm against the trunk of the baobab and whispered, "Tell me why you speak to me. Tell me what you want." The ground shuddered beneath my knees. The branches groaned, twisting like ribs of something awakening. A deep rumble filled the air, not from the clouds, but from the earth itself. Then the forest spoke, not in whispers this time, but in a voice vast enough to shake the stars. It rolled through me like a wave of grief and fury, and I felt the tears burn down my face as if they belonged to something far greater than me. "The world is breaking," the forest said, its voice echoing through the storm, ancient and alive. Men have forgotten their roots, and the soil is bleeding. You, child of silence, must listen, because only through you can the earth be healed." And as the thunder roared above and the trees bent toward me, like witnesses to a vow, I understood that my life would never again belong to me. That night, the forest chose me, not as its servant, but as its voice. They feared me long before they ever knew why. It wasn't my words or my silence. It was the way the wind bent around me, the way the trees swayed when I passed, the way storms followed me home as if I carried the sky in my shadow. I didn't bring the curse to the village. I was born inside it. From the moment the forest spoke my name, I knew my life would no longer belong to me. What I didn't know was how quickly a whisper could turn into a weapon. Within days, every corner of the village buzzed with superstition. They said I'd traded my soul for the language of trees, that when I laid my ear to the earth, I was calling spirits from their graves. When the rain stopped and the river shrank to a dying thread, they didn't see drought. They saw punishment. And when thunder rolled across the horizon, they said it was my laughter echoing through the clouds. The world I called home turned against me, piece by piece. Neighbors who once shared food now crossed themselves when I walked by. Children ran from me, their mothers clutching charms made of bones and beads. My mother tried to defend me, but every word she spoke was drowned by fear. The day the winds tore the roofs from their huts, the elders gathered in the square, their eyes blazing with suspicion and smoke. "He is no longer one of us," they said. "The boy has called upon the spirits that hunger for men." I stood among them, trembling, but not from fear, from anger at their blindness. How could they not feel what I felt in the earth? The warning beneath their feet, the sorrow in the air. That night, they came for me. I woke to the sound of chanting, the low, heavy rhythm of hatred dressed as prayer. Fire lit the edges of my vision, torches moving like serpents through the dark. They tore through the hut, dragged me out by my wrists, and threw me into the dust before the chief's feet. My mother screamed until her voice broke. "He is my son," she cried. "He's only a child." The chief's voice cut through the night. "No child commands storms." Their judgment was swift. Exile. "Leave this place before dawn," he said. "Take your curse with you." So I did. I walked barefoot into the forest, the soil cold against my skin, the moon heavy above the trees. But the deeper I went, the softer the air became. The whispers returned, not cruel this time, but tender, guiding me toward something ancient. The forest glowed faintly with mist, and I found myself standing before a tree older than memory itself. Its bark shimmered with silver veins, and its roots pulsed like the veins of a living heart. I felt its presence before I heard its voice. "Do not fear, child," it said, and the sound wasn't in my ears. It was inside me, resonating through bone and breath. "I am Mother Cantu, keeper of beginnings. You have been called because you remember what others forgot." I fell to my knees, tears burning my face. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why give me a gift that brings only pain?" The ground quivered beneath her roots, and the air thickened until it hummed like a heartbeat. "You are not cursed, Keanu. You are chosen. Long before this age of kings and walls, there was one land, one people, one voice that spoke to the earth. But greed divided them. 2 kingdoms were born from that betrayal. Brothers turned to enemies, their blood soaking the soil. The wound they left behind has not healed." Her branches bent low, almost touching me. "Your blood is their bridge. The same earth that cursed you will one day crown you." Visions flooded my mind. 2 thrones on opposite mountains, their banners torn by endless wind. Armies marching beneath burning skies, rivers running red, then clear again. And in the middle of it all, a man stood between them, his hands raised, not in battle, but in peace. His face was older than mine, but his eyes were mine exactly. When I opened my eyes, dawn was breaking. The forest shimmered with dew like 1,000 tears. I placed my palm against Mother Kantu's trunk, and she whispered one final truth. To heal the world, you must first survive it. When I returned to the village, they were waiting. The chief, the elders, the fear. My mother's eyes met mine, swollen from crying. They will not. Listen, she said. They've already decided. The elder raised his staff and pointed to the forest. Go, boy, he said, his voice cold as stone. You belong to the darkness now. As I turned away, thunder cracked once more, low and mournful. The villagers scattered, crossing themselves in panic. But I didn't look back, because I knew that sound wasn't thunder. It was the forest weeping with me, and in its tears, I heard a promise that the curse they cast out would one day return as their salvation. They threw stones as I left, but the trees bowed to say goodbye. Each rock that struck my back carried the weight of their fear, yet none of it hurt as much as the sound of my mother's sobs fading into the wind. The village had chosen its comfort over its conscience, trading me for a silence they would one day regret. And though I walked away barefoot, stripped of name and home, I didn't walk alone. The forest followed me, its whispers moving through the leaves like a promise of belonging. I wandered for days, my body weak, my mind burning with the memory of exile. The sun became my tormentor by day, and the cold, my companion by night. Hunger gnawed at me until I could taste the bitterness of my own breath. Yet every time I stumbled, the earth seemed to catch me. When I collapsed beneath the shade of strange trees, their roots curved softly around me like arms. When thirst clawed at my throat, the wind led me to hidden streams that shimmered under moonlight. I began to understand that nature was not merely alive, it was aware. It had chosen me, and in return, it demanded trust. The spirits of the forest began to reveal themselves in subtle ways. I would hear songs in the rustle of grass, warnings in the crackle of dry branches, laughter in the rush of rivers. One night, as I built a small fire from fallen twigs, the flames twisted into shapes. Faces of old kings and broken crowns. I felt the weight of their sorrow in the air. Why show me this? I whispered into the smoke. The wind answered, low and rhythmic, because you must know what you are meant to mend. The lessons came in forms I didn't always understand. The owls taught me patience, how to wait without fear. The streams taught me movement, how to flow through obstacles without breaking. The stones taught me endurance, how to carry the weight of time without complaint. And through it all, Mother Kantu's voice echoed in my dreams. To heal the land, you must first learn to listen beyond pain. Months passed. The boy the village cast out had grown into something quieter, stronger, tempered by solitude and suffering. My hair grew wild, my skin bronzed beneath the sun, and my eyes, once filled with tears, now reflected the calm of rivers that have seen storms and survived them. But the forest's peace was not endless. One dusk, as I followed the call of distant drums, I came upon the edge of the trees and saw the world beyond. Them, and it was burning. The horizon glowed red with fire and blood. The ground shook beneath distant thunder that wasn't from storms, but from war. Smoke rose from the valley below where two armies clashed, men of two kingdoms locked in a dance of death, their cries piercing the air like arrows. I hid among the tall grasses, my heart pounding. The forest had shown me suffering before, but never like this. As I watched, a figure stumbled from the chaos. A soldier, blood staining his armor, his steps uneven. He collapsed near the tree line, gasping, his sword slipping from his hand. I rushed to him, pressing my palms to his wound. His eyes, dark and fading, met mine with a flicker of disbelief. You came from the forest, he rasped. Save your strength, I said. tearing my cloth to bind the gash, but he shook his head weakly. No one survives there. The trees, they whisper about you. I froze. What do they whisper? He coughed, his breath heavy with blood. They say, when the boy who speaks to roots leaves the shadows, the earth will change. He clutched at my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. I've seen too much death. 2 kingdoms. Brothers once, now monsters. The rivers are red. The mountains cry. Why? I asked. What do they fight for? For the crown that broke the world, he murmured. For power neither deserves. But... His words faltered. I leaned closer. The forest hushed as if it too were listening. Only one can end it. The one who hears what lies beneath. He exhaled sharply, his hand falling limp against the soil. I stayed beside him long after his heart had stopped, the scent of ash heavy in the air. The wind began to rise, moving through the branches with an urgency I hadn't felt before. I closed his eyes gently, my chest tight with the weight of what I'd just heard. The last thing he whispered lingered like a scar on the air. Only the one who speaks to the roots can end the blood. The forest shivered, every leaf trembling as if echoing his final words. I looked toward the burning horizon, 2 kingdoms devouring themselves in greed and grief, and understood that the prophecy had begun to move. I was no longer just an exile. I was the whisperer of the forest, and the blood of nations was already calling my name. Power smells like burning wood, sweet until it chokes you. I followed that scent across the dying plains, the air thick with ash and greed, until I reached the first kingdom, a place where gold glittered on dying soil, where laughter sounded like hunger disguised as music, and where even the wind seemed tired of carrying the stench of smoke. By the time I arrived at the gates of Nauru, my feet were cracked, and my voice hoarse from silence. The forest had whispered its warning days before. What grows without balance dies without mercy. And I understood it the moment I saw the kingdom. Its walls were carved from stone stolen from the earth, its towers painted with the blood of trees. The once green valleys that surrounded it were now nothing but dust and stumps. The rivers ran sluggish and brown, choked by waste. And above it all, the palace stood like a crown made of rot, beautiful from afar, poisonous up close. The king who ruled Nauru was spoken of like a god, but what I saw was a man devoured by his own appetite. He sat on a throne carved from the bones of elephants, his robes lined with silk spun from lands he had conquered, his eyes dull with indulgence. The people bowed when he passed, but not from reverence, from fear. Children starved outside his gates while his feasts fed the dogs more than the poor. Even the air inside the city seemed to kneel before his greed. I needed to stay close enough to learn, but far enough to be unseen. So I took work in the royal stables, brushing horses and mending saddles, the smell of sweat and hay clinging to me like disguise. At night, when the world slept, I would walk the palace grounds barefoot, my hands brushing the bark of the few trees that still stood near the royal gardens. Their voices were faint, weak from drought and pain, but they still whispered. Some wept softly, others spoke of things long buried. The roots remember the blood, they murmured. He takes and takes. The land can no longer breathe. Days turned into weeks, and I saw what greed truly did to a kingdom. The poor toiled in fields turned to dust. Men cut down the last of the forests to fuel the king's endless fires. The palace burned wood day and night, not for warmth, but for the illusion of power, smoke rising like incense to worship the god of consumption. And every time a tree fell, the wind cried a little louder. One afternoon, as I led the horses to the stream, I noticed the water was no longer cool or clear. It was warm, bitter, and thick with decay. Fish floated belly up, their silver scales catching the dying sun. The trees nearby moaned softly in the wind, their leaves curling like tongues of flame. I pressed my palm against one of them and felt its agony. "He's killing us," it whispered. "He's killing everything." That night, I saw the king with my own eyes for the first time, not on his throne, but in his garden. He stood beneath the royal fig tree, surrounded by servants and guards, demanding that it be cut down because its shadow darkened his roses. I wanted to scream, to tell him that this tree had been older than his bloodline, that it had shaded his ancestors when they swore oaths of peace. But I stayed silent, listening instead. The moment the blade struck its bark, the ground beneath us trembled. The king laughed, pleased by his destruction, but I saw something in his face, a flicker of pain, quickly masked by arrogance. That night I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy with smoke, and the whispers of dying roots filled my head. I went to the garden, kneeling beside the stump where the fig once stood. The soil was still warm from the tree's last breath. I placed my hand on it, closing my eyes, and the world fell away. I saw visions, the king's body pale and trembling, the palace collapsing under its own greed, the land gasping for rebirth. And through it all, a voice rose from beneath the ground, deep, ancient, certain. "He is dying," the forest murmured through the wind. "And you must replace him." My eyes flew open. The night was still, but the trees were awake, their branches reaching toward the palace as if pointing the way. I stood slowly, my heart pounding. The kingdom that had turned its forests into fire was about to learn one truth, that the roots always reclaim what smoke tries to hide. The night the trees moved, men called it witchcraft. I called it justice. They said the earth trembled because of curses, but I knew it was anger. The land had reached its limit, and what they thought was the wrath of spirits was nothing more than nature remembering what it was owed. I had warned them in silence, in whispers only the leaves could hear. But greed does not listen. It devours until the ground itself rebels. The drought began quietly, almost humbly, like a beggar at a king's feast. First the stream slowed to a crawl, then the wells turned shallow. The farmers prayed, the priests lied, and the king demanded rain as though power could summon clouds. The people grew desperate, their skin cracked like the earth they tilled. Every morning I woke to the sound of breaking, branches snapping, ground splitting, faith collapsing. But through all of it, I felt something stirring deep beneath the soil. The forest was not dying, it was waiting. At night I would sneak beyond the palace walls and lay my hands on the remaining trees. Their bark pulsed with a strange heat, alive with fury and grief. "We warned them," they whispered, their voices sharp as wind through broken leaves. "They have taken too much. Now we take back." The air thickened with tension, a stillness before the storm that was not made of rain, but of roots. Then it happened. The night sky split open with thunder that carried no lightning. The ground began to breathe, slow, heavy breaths that sent dust swirling through the streets. From the cracks in the earth, vines began to rise, coiling like serpents. Trees bent and groaned as if waking from a 1,000-year sleep. Their branches stretched toward the city walls, their roots clawing at the foundations of greed. Houses trembled, palaces shook. The people screamed that the gods were punishing them, but I knew it wasn't gods. It was the forest, remembering every axe stroke, every fallen brother. I ran toward the stables to warn the others, but they were already panicking, shouting my name as though I had summoned the chaos myself. "It's the boy!" someone screamed. "The cursed one! He's brought the demons!" Within moments, guards surrounded me, their torches trembling in fear and fury. I didn't resist. There was no point. "You will pay for this," their captain hissed, spitting in my face. "You brought the forest to our gates." They dragged me through the palace halls I had cleaned, walls I had whispered to, and threw me into a cell beneath the earth. The air was thick and heavy, the only light seeping through the cracks above. I could still feel the rumble in the ground, faint but growing stronger. The forest was moving, its rage building like a tide. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost meaning in the dark. I sat against the cold stone, my wrists raw from rope, and closed my eyes. "Mother Cantu," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What have I done?" Her voice came softly at first, like wind through grass. "You have done nothing but listen," she said. "It is they who deafened the earth with greed. Do not fight the roots. Let them decide." "But they will kill everyone," I murmured, tears tracing dirt down my face. "The innocent, too." "There are no innocent kings," she replied, "and no guilty forests. The balance must be restored before new life can grow." The ground beneath my feet shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. From beyond the cell I heard guards shouting, fear in their voices, not command. Then came a sound that froze my blood, the deep, cracking groan of stone, surrendering to something stronger. I pressed my ear to the wall and felt it. Movement. Roots. Massive, alive, relentless. They were coming for the palace, tearing through marble and bone alike. I thought of the king, clutching his gold as his throne splintered beneath him. I thought of the people, running through streets that had turned to rivers of dust. I thought of the forest, rising not for vengeance, but for balance, for truth. The noise grew deafening. My cell door began to shake. I backed away, my heart pounding. The wall behind me split open, thin lines of light cutting through the darkness like veins of fire. The scent of wet earth filled the air, rich, raw, alive. I could see the roots now, thick as arms, pushing through the cracks, twisting around the iron bars. As dawn's first light seeped through the broken ceiling, the prison floor erupted. Roots burst from beneath, snapping chains, shattering stone, flooding the cell with blinding light. I fell to my knees as the air filled with the sound of the forest breathing again. The guards screamed above, the city crumbled, and I realized what Mother Cantu had meant. The roots were not here to destroy me. They were here to free me, and to remind the world that the earth always takes back what was stolen. Some thrones are carved from gold. Mine grew from pain. When the earth finished its reckoning, silence fell over Nauru like the breath after a scream. The once proud kingdom lay half-buried in its own arrogance. Palaces cracked open like fruit left too long in the sun, streets torn by roots that had risen to reclaim what greed had stolen. Smoke clung to the air, mingling with the scent of wet soil and something holier. Renewal. In the ruins of a kingdom that had forgotten mercy, life was beginning again. The king was gone. Some said he died, crushed beneath his own walls. Others whispered that the trees swallowed him whole. But no one dared search for him. The forest had drawn its line. None crossed it without trembling. I stood among the survivors, my clothes torn, my body aching, and my heart hollow from what had been lost. They stared at me, not with hatred anymore, but with awe. The kind people reserve for what they don't understand. "Who are you?" one of the elders asked, his voice shaking. Before I could answer, the wind stirred. Leaves rose from the broken soil, swirling around us like green fire. And then, in the language only I could hear, the forest spoke. Not to me, but through me. My mouth moved without command, my voice carrying words older than memory. The balance has returned. The land breathes again. The people fell to their knees. "The forest has been chosen," they cried. "He is the one sent by the gods." I wanted to protest, to tell them I was no savior, only a witness. But the truth was heavier than denial. I had felt the forest's will move through my veins like blood. It had spared me for a reason. And now, as the people begged me to lead them, I understood that my punishment had become my purpose. The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding and renewal. We buried the dead with prayers, planting saplings above their graves so that life could rise where loss had fallen. The rivers that had once run brown began to clear. their waters shimmering like veins of glass beneath the sunlight. I led rituals of cleansing, not with gold or offerings, but with work, hands in the soil, hearts in the earth. The people followed, not because they feared me, but because they saw what I carried. A voice that came from beneath the roots, not from a throne. I did not wear a crown of gold. Instead, the elders placed upon my head a circle woven from vines and thorns, a symbol of both rule and remembrance. To lead, they said, is to bleed. I accepted it with a bowed head, feeling the sharp sting of the thorns pierce my skin. The pain was grounding, a reminder that power, like the earth, must be tended with humility, or it will turn to rot. Weeks passed, and with every seed we planted, the land began to heal. The air grew softer, carrying the scent of rain before the clouds even formed. One morning, as I walked among the fields, a drop of water fell onto my hand, then another, and then the sky opened. The people screamed with joy, dancing beneath the storm as the heavens wept their forgiveness. I lifted my face to the downpour, the cool rain mixing with the salt of my tears. For the first time, the land and I cried together, not in grief, but in rebirth. But peace, I learned, is never permanent. It is only a pause between trials. That night, as the rain faded into mist and the fires of celebration burned low, I sat beneath the great fig tree that had sprouted where the old palace once stood. Its leaves shimmered faintly in the moonlight, whispering in a tongue only I could hear. The forest had been quiet for days, content to heal, but now its voice returned, low and grave. "You have done well," Mother Kantu said, her tone heavy with pride and warning. "The balance breathes again." I bowed my head. "Then it is over," I murmured. "The kingdom is safe." The wind answered sharply, shaking the branches. "No, child. One kingdom does not make the world whole. The roots run deeper, beyond rivers, beyond blood. Another land cries in silence. The curse of greed still festers there." My chest tightened. What must I do? The leaves rustled like a sigh. "You have saved one kingdom. Now save the other." The wind fell still, and for a moment the night held its breath. The moonlight flickered across the thorns of my crown, each drop of rain glinting like blood. I looked toward the horizon, where distant mountains loomed, the border of the Second Kingdom. I could almost feel its pain echoing through the soil beneath my feet. The forest had chosen its king, but it had not finished its war. The roots had found balance in one land. Now they demanded justice in another. Peace is a bridge built from bones and dreams. I had believed that saving one kingdom would silence the world's hunger for power. But peace, I learned, is never content to stay where it is born. It ripples outward, touching places that either welcome it or destroy it. The drought had ended in Nauru, the forests had healed, and the people had begun to smile again. Yet beyond the eastern mountains, another nation watched us with suspicion, a land where the soil still cracked, the rivers still bled dust, and the name of their suffering was mine. Word reached me like a curse carried by wind. The neighboring kingdom of Isanda blamed us for their ruin. Their fields had failed, their herds had vanished, and their priests declared that our rituals, the same ones that restored life to Nauru, had stolen their reign. It was a cruel irony. The balance that saved one land had unbalanced another. And now, as the rivers divided plenty from famine, their king was preparing for war. The council begged me to stay behind. "You are the chosen one," they said. "You cannot risk your life for a land that has already condemned you." But I had seen enough kingdoms built on fear to know that peace cannot survive behind walls. "If war begins," I told them, "it will not be fought by soldiers. It will be born in the silence of those who refuse to listen." So I left before dawn, wearing only the crown of thorns and a cloak woven from bark and vine. The road east was long, lined with the ghosts of what once connected the two nations. Bridges turned to ruins, trading posts swallowed by weeds. Everywhere I passed, the trees whispered warnings. They do not trust you, they said. They remember your power. But beneath the fear, I heard something softer. Hope, trembling like a leaf caught between wind and rain. By the time I reached the border, the air had changed. The land was dry, its skin cracked and pale. The river that once sang between the kingdoms now whispered weakly, its current sluggish and shallow. On its bank stood an ancient willow, older than both crowns, its roots stretching deep into both sides of the world. The locals called it the Keeper of the Divide, the guardian of the border where water and blood had mixed for centuries. Its bark was scarred from old wars, but its branches still wept into the river like an eternal prayer. I knelt beside it and placed my palm against its trunk. The wood was cold, almost lifeless, yet beneath the surface pulsed something ancient, a rhythm like a heartbeat buried beneath centuries of silence. "Mother Cantu," I whispered, "I have come where the roots meet. Tell me what must be done." The willow did not answer at first. Only the wind moved, rustling through its long silver leaves. Then, slowly, the branches began to tremble. The sound that followed was not the soft murmur of leaves. It was a voice, deep and resonant, echoing from within the trunk itself. "You bring peace," it said. "But peace is a seed that demands soil from both sides. One land cannot thrive while the other starves. The river must remember it was once one body." I bowed my head, my heart heavy. "Then tell me how to heal it," I pleaded. "Tell me how to make both kingdoms whole." The willow's voice grew softer, mournful. "You cannot command balance. You must surrender to it. The waters know the way." Before I could ask more, the river began to stir. Its surface rippled though no wind touched it. The moonlight broke across the current, painting the water in hues of emerald and gold. Then, slowly, the willow's roots shifted beneath my hands, curling and pulling apart the earth. I stepped back as the ground split open, revealing a narrow trail of light beneath the tree. It glowed like veins of living jade, winding down into the depths of the riverbank. The air shimmered with a strange energy, warm, ancient, alive. The willow's branches swayed, their whispers threading through the rising mist. "Walk where the river remembers," it said. "There you will find the truth of two thrones." I stared at the glowing path, a doorway carved from water and light, pulsing like a heartbeat waiting for mine to match it. Behind me lay the kingdom I had healed. Before me, the one still drowning in silence. And as I stepped forward, the forest's voice echoed in my mind. "To unite two nations, you must first drown as one." She ruled a dying kingdom, but her eyes burned brighter than her throne. The first time I saw her, she stood upon the cracked steps of her palace, a figure draped in smoke and defiance. Behind her, the land was bleeding, crops turned to dust, rivers reduced to whispers, children too weak to cry. Yet she did not bow to despair. She wore it like a crown. Her name was Queen Niara, and her people called her the flame that wouldn't die. To others, she was ruthless, a ruler forged in famine and pride. But when I looked at her, I saw something else. A woman fighting the world with nothing but the fragments of her own heart. I had crossed the glowing path of the willow and stepped into her kingdom under a sky that seemed allergic to light. The soil was pale and brittle, the air thick with the scent of old smoke and forgotten prayers. I was stopped before the gates by soldiers whose armor gleamed, but whose eyes were hollow. "You are the forest's prophet," one said with disdain. "Our queen awaits, not to listen, but to judge." When they brought me to her throne room, I understood what despair looked like when it learned to wear diamonds. The palace was magnificent and ruined at once. Marble floors cracked with age, gold walls dulled by ash. At the center sat Queen Niara, her posture regal, her expression carved from exhaustion and fire. "So," she said, her voice like flint, "the forest sends me a beggar to preach peace?" "I bring truth, not sermons," I replied, "and truth rarely arrives in silk." Her lips curved into something between amusement and warning. "Careful, prophet. Words are cheaper than water here, and we have neither to waste." I met her gaze without flinching. "Then perhaps you should stop burning both." A ripple of shock passed through the court. The guards' hands twitched toward their weapons, but the queen lifted her hand, silencing them. For a long moment, she studied me, not as a threat, but as a mirror she didn't ask for. "You speak boldly for a man whose kingdom lies across my river," she said. "Tell me, prophet, why does your land bloom while mine withers?" "Because your people have forgotten to listen," I said softly. "Not to me, to the earth." Her laughter rang sharp and hollow. "The earth has been silent for years. If it speaks to you, it must have a cruel sense of humor." I walked to the tall windows overlooking the barren fields. "It isn't silence," I said, pressing my palm to the glass. "It's suffocation. You've cut the trees, chained the rivers, and crowned greed as God. The land isn't cursed. It's starving." Her smile faded, the flame in her eyes flickering between anger and grief. "You think I don't know hunger?" she snapped. "I was born in this dust. My people die because the rain betrayed us, not because of my throne." The room trembled with her rage, but beneath it, I heard something else. Pain, deep and raw, the kind that turns compassion into armor. "You mistake the wound for the weapon," I said quietly. "Your land is not punishing you. It's waiting for you to remember it." She stared at me, her breathing heavy. For the first time, I saw her fire falter, not extinguished, but uncertain. "You speak like a man who's lost everything," she murmured. "I have," I answered, "and that is why I can see what you are about to lose." That night we walked together along the edge of the river, the same river that divided our worlds. The moon cast its fractured reflection across the shallow water, each ripple glinting like a wound that refused to close. She told me stories of her childhood, of the days when fish still danced in the streams, when laughter echoed through the fields. I listened, feeling the ache in her words. Somewhere between confession and accusation, something fragile began to grow. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. "Tell me," she asked softly, "if the earth still listens to you, can you make it forgive us?" "It doesn't need forgiveness," I said. "It needs faith." For a while, neither of us spoke. The night seemed to hold its breath. The river murmured below us, restless, alive. Then, without warning, the ground beneath our feet trembled, a deep guttural sound rising from the depths like thunder trapped beneath the earth. The water shuddered, its reflection breaking apart as the air filled with the scent of rain and roots. The queen stumbled, clutching my arm. "What's happening?" she whispered. "The forest," I said, my voice low, almost reverent. "It's waking." The river began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, until its surface pulsed with veins of green light. The willow's whisper carried across the wind, ancient and commanding. "The balance is near, if you dare to face it together." Queen Niara turned to me, her eyes wide with fear and awe. The trembling earth beneath us seemed to breathe, and as the light reached our feet, I realized this was not just the forest's awakening. It was its judgment. When men fought each other, the earth fought back. The first spark of war didn't come from swords or fire. It came from pride. Rumors moved faster than reason, turning truth into a weapon neither kingdom could control. Soldiers gathered along the riverbanks, armor glinting beneath a sky swollen with storm clouds. And for the first time in centuries, the river that had once united the two nations became a wound that bled on both sides. I stood between them, A man crowned by the forest, cursed by men, and chosen by fate, watching peace crumble like ash between trembling hands. Queen Niara had pleaded for patience, but her council demanded vengeance. "He has bewitched the land," they cried. "His forest steals our rain." On the opposite bank, my own people shouted the same lies, their fear twisted into rage. I saw faces I once knew, farmers, guards, mothers, now hidden behind spears and hate. The air reeked of sweat and smoke, of faith turned into fury. I wanted to scream, but what voice could reach hearts already burning? At dawn, the first arrow flew. It was small, almost insignificant, a streak of iron cutting the silence. But it was enough. Within moments the valley erupted. Shields clashed, horns wailed, and the river turned red before the sun had fully risen. The sky darkened with smoke as soldiers on both sides charged, driven not by justice, but by fear. I ran into the heart of the chaos, calling out to the trees, to the wind, to the roots that slept beneath the ground. "Stop them," I begged. "Protect them, even from themselves." The forest answered. The earth shuddered beneath my feet, cracks splitting open like veins. From the soil, roots burst upward, coiling around blades, pulling men from their horses, breaking the rhythm of war. Trees bent like guardians, their branches forming shields of green against the fire and steel. But men do not surrender to miracles. They defy them. The general shouted that the forest was cursed, that it served a false prophet. Soldiers hacked at the roots, torches blazing in their hands. Flames spread through the dry brush, roaring louder than the screams of the dying. The air filled with the scent of burning wood, a cruel echo of the kingdom's own greed. I felt the pain of every leaf that turned to ash, every tree that fell. It was as if the land itself was crying through my veins. Then, through the smoke, I saw her, Queen Niara, sword in hand, her dress torn and blackened by soot, fighting beside her people. The crown she once wore lay forgotten in the mud. Her eyes met mine across the battlefield, and in that fleeting moment, I understood. This war wasn't between nations. It was between forgiveness and pride. She ran to me, cutting through the chaos, striking down the men who tried to reach me. "Call it back," she shouted. "Stop the forest before it kills them all." "I can't," I gasped. "It isn't my power anymore. It's theirs. The earth decides now." A bolt of lightning split the sky, striking the center of the field. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Soldiers staring at the sky in terrified silence. And then came the flood. The river, long starved of rain, surged with fury, its banks bursting open as if centuries of restraint had finally broken. Water roared across the land, sweeping away fire and flesh alike. I grabbed Niara's hand as the torrent rose around us. "Hold on," I shouted, pulling her toward the willow that stood glowing on the hill, the last untouched remnant of life amid ruin. We climbed, slipping in the mud, breathless and desperate. Around us, soldiers dropped their weapons and prayed as the forest moved like a storm given shape. Roots burst through the ground, forming bridges, saving those who ran instead of fighting. The trees weren't killing. They were protecting. The land was cleansing itself, choosing mercy over blood. When we reached the hilltop, I turned back and saw the two kingdoms drowning side by side, their borders erased by the river's wrath. For the first time, they were equal in loss. I looked at Niara. "This is what it costs," I said, voice breaking, "to forget where life begins." She opened her mouth to speak, but her eyes widened instead. Behind me, a soldier had drawn his bow, face twisted with hatred. I heard the string snap before I felt the pain. The arrow struck deep, burying itself in my chest. My breath caught. The world tilted. Niara screamed, catching me before I fell. "No," she cried, pressing her hands over the wound. "You can't die. Not now." I looked up at her through the haze of rain and smoke. It was meant for you, I whispered. Tears streaked her ash-stained face as the forest's glow dimmed. Why? She asked, voice breaking. Why save me? Because, I said, the words trembling between breaths. The world needs roots. And fire. To live. The rain poured harder, washing the blood from my hands as my vision blurred. Around us the battlefield fell silent, the river settling, the earth stilling, the forest watching. Nyara held me close, her sobs mingling with the wind. Stay with me, she whispered. The land still needs you. But as the last of my strength faded, I heard Mother Kantu's voice once more. Soft, distant, eternal. The roots have done their part, she said. Now let the fire learn to heal. And then the light took me. Death is quiet, but the forest still speaks. When the arrow pierced my chest, I thought silence would be my final companion. The world faded into the dim echo of rain and distant cries, and then even those disappeared. There was no pain, no fear, only the weightless drift of surrender, as if the earth itself had exhaled and carried me into her breath. I didn't fall into darkness. I fell into green light, endless, soft, and ancient, like the heart of the forest dreaming. When I opened my eyes, I was standing among trees older than memory, their trunks wide as temples, their branches heavy with whispers. The air shimmered with spirits, glowing silhouettes woven from roots, mist, and memory. Every step I took pulsed like walking across veins that connected the living and the lost. And in the center of it all stood Mother Kantu, radiant and vast, her face carved from bark and moonlight, her eyes deep as rivers that had seen the birth of time. You've walked far, child of dust, she said, her voice rustling through the leaves. And now you rest between worlds, not dead, not alive, but listening. I bowed my head, my heart trembling. The world is broken again, I whispered. The forest fights, the rivers bleed, and I have failed to protect what you entrusted to me. Her hand, ancient, rough yet gentle, touched my cheek. You have not failed, she said. You mistook leadership for burden. But the land never asked for a king. It asked for a guardian. The difference lies not in power, but in surrender. Her words cut through me like wind carving through stone. Then why bring me back, Mother? I asked. Why save me when I've done nothing but bleed for both kingdoms? Because the world you built in pain is ready to be reborn, she said softly. But it cannot bloom from anger, only from humility. You were chosen not because you could command the forest, but because you could listen to it. Even now, as you lie between breaths, the earth still listens to your silence. From behind her, the forest shimmered with visions. My village, my mother's hands weaving mats under the sun, her laughter mingling with bird song. I saw the day I first spoke to the trees, a lonely boy whispering his grief to the wind. I saw the faces of the people who had called me cursed, now kneeling before the same earth they once mocked. I saw Queen Nyara, her hands bloodied, holding my lifeless body, her tears falling onto the ground that once hated her. Wherever her tears landed, grass began to grow. Do you see? Mother Kantu murmured. The world heals not when men win, but when they weep. You have taught fire to grieve, and that is how life begins again. I wanted to stay there, in that peace, in that infinite stillness where pain no longer reached me. But the forest began to fade, its light dimming like a candle in the wind. The roots beneath me pulsed one last time, carrying the voice of Mother Kantu through my chest. Go back, child of the whisper. The crown you wear now is not of gold or thorn. It is silence, and through it, the world will learn to listen. The light burst, green, blinding, alive. I felt the pull of breath returning, the burn of air clawing into my lungs. My body jerked, heavy, aching, real. When my eyes opened, dawn was breaking over the battlefield. The rain had stopped, and the sky was painted with streaks of rose and gold. I lay in Queen Niara's arms, her face streaked with ash and tears, her lips murmuring prayers to gods she no longer doubted. The river flowed again beside us, calm, full, reborn. I looked into her eyes and saw reflection instead of fire, peace instead of pride. And as the first sunlight touched the land, I heard the forest whisper, "The earth remembers its king, not in voice, but in silence." I was born from dirt, but the earth itself crowned me. The day the two nations gathered by the river, I stood barefoot on the soil that had once tasted too much blood. The air was thick with the scent of rain and rebirth, and in every face, soldier, farmer, queen, I saw the same question. Could a world stitched from grief truly hold together? I looked across the water to Queen Niara, her crown tarnished, but her spirit blazing anew. And I understood that kingship was never meant to sit on one head. It was meant to live between hearts that dared to heal. The war had ended, not because we conquered each other, but because the forest demanded silence, the kind that comes only after understanding. When I awoke from the edge of death, the world had already begun to change. Soldiers from both sides had laid down their weapons and were digging trenches not for graves, but for seeds. The river that once divided us now shimmered like a thread of forgiveness, weaving two wounds into one scar that no longer hurt. We stood together before the people, Niara and I, neither ruler seeking power, but both seeking peace. The elders of both nations gathered around, their faces lined with years of loss and disbelief. A priest from my homeland held a bowl carved from ancient stone, filled with soil from both kingdoms. "From earth you came," he said, "and by earth you shall rule, not as king of men, but as servant of balance." He pressed the soil to my forehead, and in that moment I felt something deeper than any crown could give. A pulse, vast and ancient, rising through the ground into my veins. The trees in the distance swayed, though there was no wind, as if bowing in witness. The crowd knelt as one. Their voices rose in chant, a song I did not recognize, but that the forest surely did. Niara stepped forward, her hand trembling as she placed a woven circlet of roots and gold upon my head. "This crown was not made by hands," she said softly. "It was grown by pain, watered by sacrifice, and born of truth." For the first time in memory, both nations cheered together. The sound rolled like thunder, not of war, but of awakening. People embraced across the riverbank, sharing bread, tears, and stories. The children, who had only known fear, ran freely between borders that no longer existed. Every soul in that valley carried a piece of hope that had once been buried too deep to find. In the weeks that followed, we began to rebuild, not walls, but bridges. The two capitals opened their gates to each other. Markets flourished, schools reopened, and temples once silent sang again. The first decree I made was simple. No man shall own the forest, for the forest owns us all. The second was even simpler. Let every child plant one tree, so they remember that peace has roots. And so they did. Across valleys and mountains, across fields that once burned, people dug their hands into the soil. Old men who once wielded swords now pressed saplings into the ground with reverent care. Women sang songs of gratitude to the wind, and the children laughed as the rain kissed their faces. Within a season, the land bloomed again, not just with life, but with memory. Niara and I ruled not from a palace, but from the edge of the river, the place where it all began. Our councils met under the open sky, where decisions were made in the presence of trees, not thrones. She was fire, I was root, and together we became something new, not conquerors, but caretakers. She would often tease, "So, prophet of trees, are you satisfied?" And I would smile, replying, "Ask the earth, it never lies." But even in the peace, I felt the hum of something deeper, a rhythm beneath the soil, like the forest breathing in its sleep. At night, when the moon rose over the river, I would walk to the sacred grove, where the oldest trees still whispered secrets older than kings. One evening, as the wind rustled through the leaves, I bowed before the grove, the same place where Mother Kantu had once spoken to me. The trees glowed faintly under the moonlight, their roots intertwining like veins of a living heart. I whispered, "It's done. The world is at peace." But the forest stirred, and 1,000 voices rose in one breath, deep, ancient, endless. "This is not the end," they murmured. "This is the beginning of the roots." I closed my eyes, the earth trembling softly beneath me, and for the first time I understood. Peace was not the end of the story. It was the seed of another. Kings die, forests live, but some stories grow forever. I have worn crowns of gold and garlands of leaves, yet none weigh heavier than the silence between the wind and my name. Years have passed since the wars ended, and peace has rooted itself deep in the soil of our twin kingdoms. The rivers run clear again, the fields breathe, and laughter has replaced the echo of swords. I walk among the trees not as a king seeking worship, but as a student, still listening, still learning. The palace now stands open to the forest. Its walls are woven with vines, its courtyards shaded by branches that remember the old pain of the world. Even the air smells different, cleaner, forgiving. People say I rule 2 nations, but the truth is simpler. The earth rules us all, and I merely learned how to hear it speak. Each dawn, I rise before the sun, walking barefoot across the dew-soaked grass, my crown left behind. I greet the trees like old friends, pressing my palm to their bark, until I feel that ancient heartbeat, slow and eternal. The queen, Nyara, still walks beside me, fire tempered into light. She governs with a strength born of mercy, and together we teach our children what true power means. Not command, but care. The forest listens, I tell them. So must we. Our youngest, Lumo, listens most of all. He talks to the trees as I once did, his laughter blending with the wind. The people smile when they see him, saying he carries my gift. I smile too, though in truth it was never mine to give. The story of the boy who spoke to trees has spread beyond our borders. Travelers come from faraway lands to see the living kingdom. They call me the Whispering King, though I no longer need to whisper. The land itself speaks for me, in rain that comes on time, in roots that rise through broken stone, in every green leaf that says we survived. Sometimes, when the palace grows quiet, I sit beneath the oldest tree and listen. I no longer ask questions. I no longer seek answers. The forest has taught me that the greatest wisdom is not in speaking, but in understanding that all things, even pain, have purpose. The trees once wept with me. Now they hum with peace. One night, as the moonlight spilled through the garden, I saw Lumo standing alone beneath a young acacia. His hand rested on its trunk, his eyes closed. I was about to call him inside when I heard his voice, soft, full of wonder. "Father," he whispered, "I can hear them too. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Like, share, and tell me in the comments which moment moved you the most. Your one click gives life to every story I write and helps me keep creating tales that speak to the soul. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next story, where every tale reminds us what it truly means to be human.